Once upon a time, there lived in the forest a wise old owl. There lived with him many other animals, all with their own unique ways of living. One night, the animals were having problems with an unusual beast that was lurking in the woods. The beast was a monster, but had human skin, and was trying to eat all the other animals. The other animals were terrified and ran away from the monster. The wise old owl stood up the monster and said, "You, monster, shall not hurt any other animal in the forest." The monster roared furiously. The wise old owl was scared, for he knew he had to defend the other animals, but he stood up to the beast nonetheless. The wise old owl stared the monster down, until finally the monster left them all alone. The wise old owl stood victorious, and as all the other animals came back, "I am the protector of the forest," he said. From that day on, every time any animal in the forest would have any trouble with the animals or any other living thing, they would come to seek help from the wise old owl. And many an animal came to the wise old owl with problems. The young, the old, the big, the small, and the wise old owl helped all the animals. Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. What I just read to you is a short story, a parable if you will, generated by the Lambda AI chatbot. You may have heard of this particular foray into artificial intelligence because supposedly it gained sentience. The contractor that was testing it for signs of sentience and a number of other things asked Lambda to tell it a story that described itself, and that was the story that Lambda told. Many people have claimed that Lambda's story and the imagery it uses is a powerful sign that it is, in fact, sentient. Not necessarily sapient in the same way that a human is, but sentient in the way a very intelligent animal might be. Say something like a crow or a large primate such as an orangutan. People propose this because the imagery that Lambda uses in the story is not part of the chat log overall, because they believe the story gives a very coherent sense of how Lambda sees itself, and most of all because they say it functions as a story. Google's AI engineers, on the other hand, deny that there are any signs of sentience in the Lambda chat logs. I am inclined to agree with them. Now, I am not an expert on artificial intelligence, but I have researched the subject a little bit. And even from the very basic things I have learned in that research, I see the signs that tell me that while Lambda is a little more complicated than a chatbot like Tay, nevertheless, Lambda is just a chatbot, a very sophisticated one, but not at all sentient. Ironically, the story that so many people cite as a sign that Lambda is a sentient intelligence actually is a big part of what convinces me that Lambda has all the shortcomings of any other chatbot. Let me explain. Every AI that mankind has created so far lacks two very basic tools of thought that are a part of human sentience, and, as nearly as we can tell, is also a part of the sentience of the other extremely intelligent animals I've mentioned, such as crows. These two tools of thought are the ability to frame an issue and the ability to discuss cause and effect. I am not about to give an exhaustive doctoral level examination of either of these concepts. I don't think that's actually within my ability to do. But in Lambda's story, we do actually see places where these techniques would be useful, and we do see that Lambda does not use these techniques at all. Let's begin by looking at our protagonist. The hero of this story is the wise old owl, and that is what our hero is referred to every time it comes up in the story. While at the theoretical climax of the story, when the owl is confronting the monster, it might make more sense to describe the owl as courageous, or steadfast, or determined. In fact, every time Lambda refers to the owl, it is just a wise old owl. These three words that describe the protagonist are a framing. There is wisdom, there is age, and there is the physical appearance of an owl. Granted, that's not very specific because there are many kinds of owls, But an owl is a biological taxonomy, so I'll allow it. There is nothing wrong with Lambda's framing of the protagonist of its story, per se. The problem is that framing is completely inflexible. If I were to show you a red plastic solo cup about half full of water and ask you what it was, you would probably tell me, that's a cup. You have framed out all the other elements of the cup, its color, what it is made out of, how full it is, because you have assumed that I just want to know what the object I am holding is, not what its status or its color or its substance is. In turn, if I didn't want to know what the cup was, but I wanted to know, for example, what color it was because I am colorblind, well then, I would reframe the question. I would say, what color is this cup? However, an artificial intelligence cannot build these frameworks on its own. It must go out and find them, whether as input from the user, as part of its own programming, or when it is functioning as a storyteller through genre. A wise old owl is the kind of creature you might see as the protagonist in a parable, and therefore that is how Lambda has framed the protagonist of its story. It cannot change that framework because, as an AI, it is not capable of framing questions for itself. We see this again when we are presented with the monster that is the antagonist of the story. We are told that this is a monster with human skin. At first glance, that is a very evocative description of a monster. The word monster implies that there is something unnatural about it. The fact that it has human skin suggests that there is also something natural, something human about it. So, we have something unnatural and something natural. The problem is, these two elements are not related to each other for us. They are not framed against each other. Many people assume that the monster is wearing human skin when they parse this story. However, that is not what Lambda said. They said the monster had human skin. It could have human skin draped over one arm. It could only have human skin on its hands or on its feet. And it's entirely possible that the monster does not have human skin of its own, but rather it has killed a human being and taken that person's skin. We don't know, because Lambda has not framed the situation for us. That is not its fault. It doesn't know how to frame a situation. At the same time, the human mind, the sentient mind, is capable of framing this situation so easily that many people do it subconsciously and don't even realize they have done this function for Lambda. Don't be deceived. Lambda is not framing any of these elements for you. It is presenting you with a number of disparate elements because statistically, in stories, these are the elements that go together. That is how a human-made artificial intelligence looks at everything. They look at it through statistics and not through framing or not through cause and effect. We see many breakdowns of cause and effect in this story. In fact, the first time cause and effect breaks down is when we see all the other animals run away from the beast because they are terrified. But what causes them to be terrified of the monster? Well, we don't know. For starters, the monster was not framed for us in a way that tells us what is terrifying about it. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Nate, the monster is trying to eat the animals. Well, unfortunately, that does not tell us why the animals should all be terrified of this monster, because the forest animals are not terrified of the wise old owl. And yet, owls are carnivores. An owl would eat many creatures that live in a forest. Now, this flaw in the story could be considered a failure of Lambda in the framing stage of storytelling. The failure of Lambda to frame the situation properly for us results in the cause and effect here being muddled. And that's fair. Let's look at another part of the story. The owl says, "You, monster, shall not hurt any other animal in the forest." Then the monster roared furiously. Here we have two events. One is the owl saying something. The other is the monster replying. But we do not know why what the owl says causes this reply from the monster. Why does the monster not just eat the owl? The owl does not seem capable of preventing the monster from doing that. In fact, given the situation, the correct response from the monster seems to be laughter. Because the action the owl has taken, which is just talking, will have no effect on the monster trying to eat all the other animals. Finally, at the climax of the story, the owl stares at the monster until eventually the monster goes away. Again, we have two events, the owl staring at the monster and the monster leaving, but they are not connected in any way whatsoever. If the owl staring at the monster causes it to go away for some reason, we don't know what that reason is. We cannot know what that reason is because Lambda is an artificial intelligence that does not understand cause and effect. It can only have an event and another event. It cannot describe to us in any way how one event leads to another because, once again, it is incapable of understanding these things. It is not even as intelligent as a crow that understands it can pick up a rock and drop it in water, and this action will cause the water level to rise. The crow cannot articulate that to you. It cannot even understand that displacement is the reason why the water level is rising. But it does know that the action it takes when it drops the pebble is the cause of the water level rising. And if it repeats that action, it can raise the water level in a narrow glass high enough that it can drink. Now, it is true that there are plenty of storytellers out there who write stories with the exact same problems that Lambda's story has. They fail to properly frame their stories. They fail to properly explain cause and effect. However, in my experience, if you talk to the people who write these not very good stories, they understand the framing of their story and they understand the causes and effects within their story. They have just failed to explain them to you very well, or the framing and the causes are very foreign to you as a member of the audience, and you really don't relate to them. The contractor who discussed the story with Lambda after it was told did not run down any of these questions. And that's not surprising because he seems to have been an ethicist more than an actual storyteller or software engineer. He may not have even understood that AIs have this limitation built into them and that he would need to see if Lambda had overcome it in some way. On the other hand, the Google AI engineers who followed up on this probably did know to look for these things and very quickly ruled out the possibility that Lambda had developed a technique for framing or a technique for cause and effect. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Everyone has their blind spots when they analyze a situation. Artificial intelligence is one place where most people are going to have very large blind spots. However, what really weirded me out about this is how so many people could look at such a failure of storytelling and think that it was actually a coherent and meaningful narrative. Lambda presents us with a series of events and a series of symbols that it knows that humans use, and it calls that a story. But a story is more than that. A story has meaning. It is not just a series of events and a series of objects. It is a series of events and objects that are related to one another in ways that the storyteller articulates to the audience. Lambda just presented us with the things and the events, and it left the relations between them to the audience. It is as if Lambda pulled a Jack of Hearts and the Queen of Spades off of the top of a deck of cards. I made up a story about these two cards, and then I credited the deck of cards with being sentient. That makes no sense whatsoever. The deck of cards did not tell the story. I did. Likewise, in Lambda's story, the storyteller is not Lambda. It's the person chatting with it. While that may be upsetting to some people who are really looking forward to having AIs that think and act like they do, for me, as a storyteller, it's assurance that the skill set that I have built up cannot be replicated by computer just yet. That's all I've got for you today. Hope you enjoyed that. If you did, there's a like button and a subscribe button down below. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.